Lucky Score. Written by Deborah Coonts. Narrated by Patricia Santamasso. Chapter 1. The barrel of a gun pressed to my temple stopped me mid-stride. "Put your hands up." A female voice, forced to a deeper timbre, echoed in my ear, her breath hot on my cheek. Adrenaline surged through me. My anger spiked. Saturday night, Vegas, my hotel, a crowd packed in. Over my dead body. I grabbed the gunman's forearm, pushing upward. Then I reached up, twisting the pistol out of her hand. She yelped in pain as I wrenched her arm behind her, dropping her to her knees. My knee was poised to pop her elbow should she even look at me cross-eyed. I stared down at my newly discovered cousin, who was more like a half-sister. Bethany. Only 17, she was all arms and legs, big eyes, and bad judgment. "The gun's a fake. I was just," she stammered, then stopped as the error of her joke washed over her a moment too late. I could see it in the widening of her eyes, the flush of her flawless skin. Her youth mocked me. Yesterday, I'd been just like her. Well, not quite as stupid, I hoped. But a teenager without a home, without a father. Her mother was in an asylum, and mine should have been. I'd been the big boss's problem, and Bethany was mine. Life had spun full circle. At twice her age, common thought said I'd traded time for wisdom, though most days, nobody could prove it by me. The kids had it lucky. With time, they could mitigate stupidity. But for the rest of us, with so much time behind us, and the past being only immutable, our stupidity plagued us, with the hope for a cure dwindling. I cranked her arm a little harder, forcing home my displeasure and maybe a bit of a lesson. "Ow!" The crowd milling in the lobby had moved back, giving us a wide berth. Thankfully, nobody had panicked at the sight of the gun. We were all a bit twitchy about that sort of thing right now, all things considered. When I tucked the pistol in my waistband, securing it at the small of my back, the crowd clapped. "Party's over. False alarm." A few folks snapped photos. Should one of them show up in the Review Journal, it would teach my cousin a lesson. But I shut down the shutterbugs with a glare. "Don't even think about it. Privacy concerns trump your right to gain followers." A weak threat in this viral crazy world. Pay per follower, the latest get-rich scheme. Thank God I had aged out of the digital marketing department. If the millennials took over, would they kill us all on our 30th birthdays? Fiction becomes reality, thereby consuming the old adage. The way my life normally went, anything was possible. Great, something else to worry about. As if a hotel full of NFL players and their fans, newly found relatives without enough sense to know firearms in public spaces were rather incendiary, a mother who still hadn't named her month-old twins, a father who was taking his sweet time recovering from a bullet to the chest, a fiancé who personified perfection, and a former love who didn't, but who still had a place in my heart. Not to mention the scabbed-over bullet wound to my calf that was making me slightly less than my normal impatient self. A month after New Year's, and a birthday that sank me further into my 4th decade, and I was hardwired to pissed off. And I wasn't sure why. All of the foregoing was nothing more than a whine. None of it anything more than business as usual. But something had kidnapped my smile. Not that that was all that unusual either, since I'm doing all this soul-bearing and all. My job was Vice President of Customer Relations, keeping the Babylon, Vegas's primo strip resort casino hotel, in a non-viral space. At least, that's the job they paid me for. Family was a cross we all bore, some of us better than others. Given that my mother, Mona, would try a saint's soul, and I would never be considered for canonization, I probably fell at the apex of the bell curve on handling familial relations. I could live with that. When it came to my family, resisting homicide was a huge victory. The men? I don't know. It's like the adage writers followed me around. Grass is greener? Check. Love is blind? Check. Any port in a storm? Well, not exactly, but close enough considering the green grass analogy. I hadn't taken the plunge, but the fact that it was tempting was so out of character for this serial monogamist. When it comes to love, women are clueless? Okay, not an adage, but if it were, I'd prove it too. And that part about telling myself that fermented fruit juice is the same as eating the fruit when it came to keeping the doctor away, That was getting to be a problem, one I admitted only to myself, but I felt it dogging my heels, waiting to take a chunk out of my butt. Do I need to say I'm not handling the vicissitudes of life well? Didn't think so. People drifted back into what they had been doing, ogling, drinking, chatting, looking for the next Vegas conquest, normal activities on a Saturday night. Don't let them forget. Immobilized by her arm at a painful angle and my hands applying the leverage, Bethany hadn't moved. Her long hair hung across her face. She wore fatigues and boots, with a hint of face paint still lingering behind her ear. I didn't ease up on the pressure. That was about the dumbest stunt in the history of mankind. Only a few months ago, a boil on the ass of humanity had opened fire from the Mandalay Bay Hotel, a horror that tore the fabric of humankind, and no matter how carefully we stitched life back together, the cloth would never be whole again, never be as it once was. None of us would be. Bethany angled a wide-eyed look up at me. I just wanted to get your attention. That was the most insensitive, asinine, juvenile. The inadequacy of words stopped me cold. Do you know how many people died? The horror of that night, the outdoor concert, the bullets flying, people dropping, screaming. You're right. Seriously stupid. I wasn't thinking. As a joke, a joke? A gun is never a joke. Nor are they toys. What the hell is everyone thinking these days? Treading the line between protecting the right to own a gun and keeping guns out of the hands of psychopaths and idiots required a balance the country had yet to find. Where the hell did you get a gun? I growled, my anger spilling over, dousing rational thought. It's not real! Ow! Not real? Sure looks like it. I gave her arm another tweak, less than I wanted, but probably more than I should have. The reciprocal pain of her stinger raced up my arm. There are consequences to every stupidity. You put a gun to my head? You're lucky to be alive. Had a security guy been close by? A security guard with a twitchy trigger finger and a crowded lobby? Dear God. After releasing her arm, I helped her to her feet. Do you need assistance, ma'am? We've been monitoring. A voice sang out from the phone in the holder at my hip. Speaking of security, a voice I didn't recognize and a breach of protocol. He should have scrambled a team the minute he saw a gun, fake or not. O'Toole here. Yes, my name is O'Toole, which doesn't match either of my parents. My mother had yet to explain, but, to be honest, an explanation would border on a confession. A confession I didn't need to hear. That's how it was with Mona. She hid secrets with obfuscation. She had, however, provided an explanation as to my first name, Lucky. My given name had been her sister's, Bethany's mother's, nickname. I still fully processed that as Mona carried a load of guilt over her sister and what had happened. Stand down. I got this. False alarm. Roger that. He sounded bored. Who is this? Fox, ma'am. Fox. The guy Jerry, our security head, had been grousing about. I'm writing you up, Fox. First sign of a gun, you should have sent a team. It's my first night on the desk, ma'am. I rolled my eyes and let out a heavy sigh. Where the hell was Jerry? A rookie was the same as no one minding the store, and with the hotel full and the NFL in town? It'll be Jerry's call. Jerry's toes were safe from me stepping on them, but he'd sure as hell hear about it. Security? Bethany looked at me wide-eyed as I holstered the phone. Only a few weeks into being a Vegas resident, Bethany had yet to learn that, in a hotel like mine, with cameras everywhere, no movement went unwatched. Somebody walks into a casino with a gun, people get their knickers in a serious twist. I pointed to some of the cameras hidden among the hummingbirds and butterflies taking wing across the lobby ceiling, millions of dollars in Chihuly glass. Somebody's always watching. We can never be too careful. Had I ever been stupid enough to put a gun to somebody's head and not meant to pull the trigger? After the recent shootings, we'd started x-raying every bag that went up to a room. Not one guest, no matter their rung on the food chain, could carry a bag to their room. All of them went through our bell staff. Stuff a couple of rifles in a golf bag and hoist it on your shoulder like you just enjoyed a quick 18 holes. Nobody would have thought anything of it. Now we lived in a new reality where crazies killed for their 15 minutes and the news outlets gave it to them. Amazing how after one shot of adrenaline, I was right back to that night. I rubbed my hands together to keep them from shaking. Of course, putting them around my cousin's neck would also do the trick. Instead, I pulled the pistol from my waistband. Its heft was slightly lighter than the average handgun with a full magazine. "What's with the commando gear?" She brushed down her fatigues. Her Timberlands still had sand on them. "School doesn't start until the fall, so I got a job." Shoulders back, she tried to reclaim some dignity. Folks wandering past gave her some serious side-eye and a wide berth, which she tried to ignore. "As a mercenary?" I glanced up from my examination of her gun. Nicely balanced, it felt good in my hand. "Before you start at Cornell, I suggest you grow a brain." Lacking even a gossamer thin comeback, she wisely conceded. The end of the barrel had an orange ring around it. "What is this?" "Indicates it's an air gun. I'm working the field at War Vegas." "The new place west of town where everyone dresses up like a Marine or something and pretends they're retaking Fallujah?" "Yeah." The girl looked proud, so I kept my derogatory thoughts to myself. Maybe I was getting old, but I couldn't see how running around shooting people would advance society. Silly me, but I thought that was the sort of thing we were working to put a kibosh on. "It's so realistic," she said, her enthusiasm growing. "The guns look real, but only shoot plastic pellets. They sting when they hit, but no lasting damage. Just enough to know you're dead." "You do know this conversation is super alarming, right?" I tucked the gun back in my waistband. "I need that back. I wasn't supposed to take it. With it strapped into my leg holster, I didn't realize I had." "Pretty pricey, I bet, to get all that looks like the real thing. Don't they check their inventory in and out?" "With the players, yes. The workers are assigned their own pieces." "All handguns?" "No, we get to choose. Why are you asking?" "Oh, no real reason." I grabbed her shoulder and dug in my fingers until she looked at me. "Other than a bunch of lightly trained loonies running around town with weapons that look so much like the real things, it'd be hard for a Marine or a cop to tell the difference at first glance. And a fraction of a second is more than you normally get when you point a gun at somebody who has a weapon of their own." I shrugged and readopted a light but scathing tone. "I mean, think about it. What possibly could go wrong?" As she opened her mouth to answer, a scream echoed over the crowd in the lobby. People stopped, glasses half raised, their mouths open, their posture frozen as if the ruler of the universe had hit pause. The scream came from the direction of the front entrance. I couldn't see anything through the crowd, so I started pushing my way in that direction. Bethany dogged my heels. One scream fell short of sufficient inducement to run. Through the years, I'd learned women have this weird habit of screaming when they see people they know, or better yet, people they recognize. To be honest, running would have been a bit optimistic. Limping along like Igor, I was a far cry from fluid form. My leg didn't exactly scream, but the muscle grabbed, demanding attention. Nothing like having a bulky body part that still wanted to whine at being perforated by a bullet. Pain brought me to a momentary halt, and I danced around on one leg while I massaged the offended extremity. A month should have been plenty of time for healing, or at least enough to run out of wine. But I couldn't be so lucky, could I? A weak play on words, but simple as I am, it made me smile. "Are you okay?" Bethany asked from right behind my left shoulder. "Never better." With my ego on the line, I launched off again with renewed vigor. Foregoing my Ferragamo heels for matching flats had been a wise choice. Hemmed for heels, my brown tweed lightweight wool slacks were a tad long, but the fashion police were the least of my worries tonight. The pants were new, along with the harvest gold cashmere sweater set. The fire had consumed everything, to the point that I almost believed it had reduced me to cinders as well. Taking my weight only on my toe, I could hobble without whimpering. Still, I nearly took out 2 children who had no business being in the lobby of a Vegas hotel at this time of night. Not that it was terribly late, but kids and a Saturday night in Vegas just screamed wrong. I will admit to often being in the minority on that, though, which made me wonder, if you started life in a casino, where would you finish up? Rhetorical question. I was the walking, talking answer. Well, actually, I started life in a whorehouse in Pahrump, But only geography separated the two experiences. Bethany, showing a curious flash of wisdom, stayed behind me and didn't try to rush ahead. I hoped the screamer was nothing more than a drama queen low on attention. We had those in spades in Vegas, and it was Saturday night. Probably a full moon, too. The crowd had that kind of vibe. I'd maxed my Fitbit running from one crisis to another. I glanced at my phone. 4 minutes to handle the screamer before I was needed elsewhere. Not even a challenge for my superpowers. Right. The NFL memorabilia signing event would end in 5 minutes, and I'd been on my way to help the former greats of the game make their way to the after-party when I'd been waylaid by a stupid teenager, to the extent that is not redundant. A quick dodge around the future wards of the state, I grimaced as my leg let me know what it thought of that. Then I bounced off a wall of solid human flesh. 2 men, sausages in suits. They didn't even register my blow. Sorry. Part of the NFL contingent in town to celebrate the San Antonio Marauders becoming the Las Vegas Marauders, or whatever name some marketing firm chose in the future. Given the overblown morality of the NFL, a big win for Sin City, but one that came with a whole new set of problems. Completely unaware of my presence, the men stared over my head. Bethany tugged on my arm. "Do you know who that is?" Breathless, she stared, big-eyed, at one of the players. I was half surprised she refrained from drooling. "Yeah, I do. Beau Boudreau." At the sound of his name, Mr. Boudreau, a mountain of muscles and arrogance, glanced first at Bethany, then leveled a gaze that held a "just try to protect her" in his small dark eyes. I might not be able to take him myself, but I could recruit an army to help if I needed to. A bruise bloomed across one cheek. Trouble had already found him, and judging from the sand that clung to his shoes and the hem of his pants, the trouble hadn't found him here. One small blessing in a night completely devoid. But even though he probably wasn't on property when he'd gotten crosswise with someone fool enough to take a swing at him, I hoped the trouble didn't involve the Babylon. The hotel that had released tapes of him laying out his girlfriend with a left jab had just filed for bankruptcy to avoid the litigation costs of going public with the tapes. No hero worship here, kid. He's just another future has-been who can't refrain from hitting women. NFL is all over him. Boudreau shrugged, as if to say there were lots of stupid women in the world willing to go to the mat for him. He wasn't the denying type. Several months from her 18th birthday, Bethany was still jailbait, so I had a little time to figure out how to make her listen to all that I'd learned the hard way. "Can we get through, please?" Boudreau didn't budge. Instead, he turned back toward the front doorway and widened his stance and held his arms out, blocking our path. While I considered a swift kick to the back of his knee, another scream echoed over the crowd. Okay, not a normal screamer. One scream could mean anything. 2 screams narrowed the scope of possibilities to serious. I tugged on the sleeve of the NFL guy closest to me, the one who wasn't Boudreau. "Can you see anything?" "Nah, a bunch of looky-loos in the way. Probably some female all bent out of shape." "You think?" That much was obvious, but pointing that out would probably not be in my best interest. I ducked around the 2 players. The time for measured calm over. This time I picked up the pace. She screamed a 3rd time. I fought the urge to run. The humans teeming in the lobby, their heads on swivels, moved toward the sound. Working my way through the thickening crowd, I still couldn't see anything. At least the surge of humanity was moving with me. I grabbed my phone and hit a familiar speed dial. "Security?" "Security." The new voice again, deep with an edge. I'd been hoping Jerry had returned from a sit-down in the can or wherever he had run off to. Only a serious threat to life as we knew it, or the siren call of Mother Nature, could make him leave his post on a Saturday night. "O'Toole here. Is this Fox again? Who the hell are you?" I didn't bother to keep the hard out of my voice. Nice took time I didn't have. "Jack Fox, acting security head, ma'am." I'd never seen anything on this kid, and Jerry had given him temporary control of security? "And Jerry? Where is he?" "On a break, ma'am." Jerry didn't take breaks, but now was not the time to argue. "Okay, Fox. We have a screamer by the front entrance. What's happening? Can you see?" One of the security cameras ought to give them a bird's eye view. Yes, ma'am. Bringing up the feed now. The kid was in love with the word ma'am. I couldn't tell why, or how he meant it. Actually, I'd made my peace with the whole ma'am thing. I chose to see it as a sign of respect, rather than age. A Pyrrhic victory, and probably delusional. But delusion was my only escape from reality. I eased through an opening in the crowd and darted ahead past a couple clutching each other with one hand and a flute of champagne with the other. The girl's tiara identified her as the bride. Ahead of them, a gaggle of young men looking for mischief formed a wedge to part the crowd. I fell into trail behind them. "What do you see?" I shouted into my phone to be heard above the excited murmurs around me. Holy shit. Apparently, Mr. Jack Fox was as young as he sounded, and not particularly helpful. But his response did tell me one thing. I was going to need help with this one. "Send a detail. Now!" "Yes, ma'am." The young voice sobered. "Ms. O'Toole, he has a knife." A guy with an automatic weapon and several full magazines was our worst-case scenario. A man with a knife, a distant second, but still a major problem in need of a quick solution. My heart rate climbed until blood pounded in my ears. "Is he—" "No, ma'am. He's just standing there. There's a lot of blood. Should I make the calls?" "Put someone between him and the crowd, and get the crowd back. I'm seconds away if someone would get this wall of humanity out of my way." "Do you need help with that?" "No, just keep the knife guy from hurting anyone until I get there. Can you see any victim?" "Negative. But there's blood. All over him." "There has to be a victim somewhere. Find him." I used the masculine generally, but a man with a knife? In all probability, the victim was a woman. So many men came to Vegas with a need for sex and with no respect for the women who provided it. One of those ethical swords men regularly threw themselves on. But the women were the ones bloodied. "Roust the doc out of bed, but wait on the paramedics." The media stuck to the EMTs like remora on sharks. "Security is on its way, right?" "Yes, ma'am." "After they've secured him, have them fan out. Given that he's covered in blood, the guy couldn't have wandered too far from the scene of the crime. We need to find his victim stat." Snaking through the crowd, I took a moment to think. The crowd was interested, calm, not panicked. An odd commentary on modern life that a man with a knife was viewed as a curiosity and not a threat. But then again, this was Vegas, or everything was part of the show. Until it wasn't. Jack Fox jumped into the silence. "But the blood. I think it's best to call the EMTs." The kid had balls. Not one of the best attributes for a young security guard, but usually the kind attracted to this kind of work. I bet he even wore his shirts 2 sizes too small to show off the size of his biceps. "My job is to do the thinking, Fox. Your job is to do as you're told." "Roger." One word slid in like a lethal blade between 2 ribs. Guess I wasn't a ma'am anymore. So much for the whole respect thing. On second thought, you're right. I so wanted to avoid the spectacle of flashing lights and sirens, but on the theory that where there was horse shit, there was a horse, we needed to be prepared to find a victim in need of serious medical attention. Rally the EMTs and find Jerry and have him call Metro. Tell him to keep it on the down low. We don't need the cops screaming in here too. He'll know who to call. You start working through the video feed. Track the guy with the knife. I want to know where he came from and how he got to my lobby. First priority is to immobilize him. Second priority, find who donated all that blood. I can't stress the urgency of that enough. I disconnected, then called my office. Miss P, my number 1, answered on the first ring. "I need you to sub for me at the signing." The NFL legends, past and current, would be signing memorabilia in the Golden Fleece Room. Someone from my staff needed to be there. Escort them to the party at Babel. Babel was our uber-cool rooftop lounge and club. On my way. Miss P rang off. Ours was a long and close corporate marriage where verbal shorthand sufficed. The crowd thickened as I drew closer. Human concrete, setting up from fluid to impassable. My plow of young men now became a wall. "Everybody back!" I shouted, as if anyone would listen. Nobody even glanced my way. I wedged a shoulder between 2 more big guys, these 2 blocking my way. "Excuse me, may I please get through? I'm with the hotel." One glanced at me. "No way, lady." I elbowed him in the ribs hard enough to make a point, but stopped short of breaking anything. As he cringed, I moved through. "Shit, lady! I think you broke my rib! All you had to do was ask." He put a hand on my shoulder, jerking me back. I did. I met him eye to eye, mine slitty, his bloodshot and wide with surprise. Most bullies didn't expect a woman topping 6 feet with some bulk behind her punches. "Let go. If you don't, next it'll be your nose." Wisely, he let his hand drop. "That was so cool," Bethany said from behind me as she rubbed her shoulder. My definition of cool and hers were separated by 17 years. People around us muttered, their excitement growing. I could read that murmur, someone recognizable. Shit. Cell phones held high. Folks snapped unobstructed photos. "Everybody back! No photos!" Nobody moved. Phones remained high. Finally, I shimmied through a crack in the human wall into the open and drew a deep breath. A man covered in blood and holding a knife, and a pretty decent blade at that. 12 inches, a serrated edge, it had a black plastic handle, a coating of blood, and a military look to it. Bethany gasped when she saw him. I put out an arm, keeping the girl back. "I know that guy," she whispered as she clung near my shoulder. Yeah, I knew him too, and my heart sank. This was so not good. Chapter 2. Nolan Ponder, the owner of the Vegas-bound NFL team, with money to burn and a lifestyle to match, wore a dazed expression and wobbled on unsteady legs. The knife seemed forgotten as he took in his surroundings with a vacant stare. He'd been making big promises, stepping on more than a few toes to coerce the approval of the team owners, the league, and apparently the Almighty herself to bring the San Antonio Marauders to Vegas. The whole thing hinged on a unique money deal, a deal requiring a significant state investment, a deal lacking support from those who were scraping by and in need of state assistance, a deal orchestrated by the man holding the knife. Blood coated Mr. Ponder's hands and most of the rest of him. The only way I'd keep this out of the news was if he'd been on a hunting trip and had decided to gut an elk in our lobby. The tux he wore pretty much shot a hole in that theory. Covered in dirt, he looked like he'd been in close hand-to-hand combat and rolling around in the desert. "No," Bethany insisted. "I know him. Like, I saw him tonight." I didn't have time to draw her out. Ponder needed to be de-weaponed before he perforated a guest. "Stay right here," I barked as I rushed toward him with a security detail a few steps behind me. At least the new kid in security had known Sirius when he heard it. Given Ponder's higher-than-most profile, I was glad I'd arrived first. Stopping in front of Mr. Ponder, I waved the security guys away. "One of you, get rid of the crowd." My eyes left Mr. Ponder for a flash to make sure the security guys understood my order was not a suggestion. They both gave me the bug eye. Easy to interpret. Saturday night, the crowd our normal level of epic, but I was the boss. One of the security dudes, I assumed the least experienced of the two, peeled off and started moving the crowd back. I gave our main attraction my undivided attention. "Mr. Ponder, are you hurt?" Nolan Ponder, his shirt red with fresh blood, his tux jacket showing wet, dark stains, and a white powdery substance that covered his left shoulder and arm and most of that side of his face, looked right through me. He wove on unsteady legs. "Hurt?" His eyes flicked to mine. "Want me to take him?" The remaining security guy hulked at my shoulder. "No, I got this. Just wait, step back a little. Keep the kid here." I nodded at Bethany, then inched closer to Mr. Ponder. I couldn't see any pulsing wounds, but truth exceeded expectation. There was way more blood than I thought possible. He breathed heavily, deep, tortured lungs full of air. The whites of his eyes were visible. Did that mean I could shoot him? I forget. But all I had was Bethany's air gun. I couldn't kill him, but I could start a stampede that might. Panic was setting in. I felt the glare of the cameras. My every move would be recorded and then shredded by lawyers and the vast public for eons to come. Okay, overstating, but at least for my lifetime, which was all that mattered to me. Pink tinged his skin. Not the pale of someone losing a lot of blood. He blinked as if trying to focus, and occasionally shuffled a foot to maintain balance. Blood splatter stitched across his face, a well-dressed, garish Frankenstein. I couldn't imagine where he'd been, what he'd been doing, and what he'd seen. Visuals tended to implant themselves in my gray matter and torture me in the wee hours. He reeked of back-alley fear, mingling with the metallic tang of blood, but no alcohol. I wondered what kind of drugs he'd been doing. Or maybe he'd had a total psychotic break. Wealthy, handsome, influential, with the requisite arm candy wife, number 4 if I remember correctly. He didn't seem the type to have any sorrows to drown, but I'd been surprised before. I'd leave the why for the cops, but I'd sure like to know the who. Mr. Ponder, it's Lucky O'Toole, Albert Rothstein's daughter, the VP of Customer Relations here at the Babylon. I searched for a glimmer of recognition. Nothing. When he raised his hand, I took a step back, even though he seemed confused by the knife he held, and not particularly intent on burying it in my chest. "Lucky, can I help?" A familiar voice sounded behind me. Jerry. Finally. A trim black man, pressed and proper in khakis, with the sleeves of his starched shirt rolled up and a flash of gold at the wrist. The perfect head of security, his tone and manner invoked calm, but demanded compliance. "No." It came out a bit harsher than I intended. "I got this." Problems were my thing, and Mr. Ponder was the very definition of a huge problem. Besides, he knew my father. Not a friend, more a respected adversary. But still, this was Vegas, and relationships were currency. "Is Romeo on his way?" I asked Jerry. I didn't want to say police. Experience taught me that particular word makes knife-wielding, blood-covered folks a bit twitchy. I so needed a new job. Jerry tried to cover a hint of anger with concern. He needn't have bothered. "Yeah, I told him lights off. No need to attract an even larger crowd." Detective Romeo was my ace up the sleeve with the Metropolitan Police Department, Metro to us locals. Through the last year or so, the young detective and I had forged an easy alliance. I glanced past Ponder to the front doors where, for the moment, a phalanx of valets barred entry and exit. Jerry once again ran the show. For that I was thankful. I wouldn't have to lead him by the nose as I would Fox. "While we're waiting on him, get some of your men to ask out front how Mr. Ponder arrived here." Jerry motioned to his men, who had been close enough to hear. They filtered away through the crowd, which was now well back, alleviating the claustrophobic crush, but giving the camera bugs better shots. For every action, an equal and opposite reaction. Yin and yang, one of the immutable rules of existence. Jerry inserted himself between me and the knife. "Let me," out of the side of his mouth. Translated, it meant, "Stay out of my way." Possible threats to my health and physical well-being brought out the Papa Bear in Jerry. He'd been my mentor long before I'd earned partner status. Technically, now with the recent promotion, I was Jerry's boss. But neither of us stood on that bit of corporate fiction. Mr. Ponder raised the knife. Alarm flashed across his face. Instinct gave me a sharp prod. I leaped at Mr. Ponder, pushing the knife down. Jerry stuck a leg behind him, then shoved Ponder backward. He landed with a thud on his back, the air leaving him in a whoosh. Jerry went with him, landing on top, using his weight to hold Ponder down. The knife clattered across the marble. Not wanting to disturb any evidence or add any trace of my own, I left it where it fell. Instead, I grabbed a gun out of the holster of the security guard standing next to me. "You haven't gotten to the part of the course where they tell you what this is for?" I asked, not expecting an answer, which was a good thing, as he gave me a 40-watt stare. I trained the gun on Ponder. "I got him, Jer." Jerry crawled off Mr. Ponder. He brushed down his khakis and shirt as he stepped away, giving me a clear shot if I needed it. "Why didn't you let me handle him?" Jerry let his irritation show. I worked to control my tone. Few things pissed me off more than some man thinking I couldn't handle my job. "Why didn't you let me? You don't need a penis to handle a man with a knife, only some balls." Jerry either didn't have a comeback or was smart enough to keep it to himself. "Where have you been, Mr. Ponder?" I resisted the urge to grab his lapels and shake the truth out of him. "Where'd all the blood come from?" He lay on the floor, staring at the ceiling. The blown glass hummingbirds and butterflies mesmerized him. He giggled. Pretty. Why don't they move? He cocked his head. Oh, there they go. The guy is stoned out of his mind, Jerry stated the obvious. Where did the blood come from, Mr. Ponder? I kept asking on the misplaced theory that if I kept wailing away, at some point, I'd get the answer I wanted. He giggled again and shrugged, then wiped his palm down his pant leg as he pulled in another deep breath. They shot him. Okay, not what I expected, but it was something. Who? I don't know who shot him. Too dark. No, who did they shoot? Pain in the ass. That really narrows it down, I said out of the side of my mouth to Jerry. The lobby had grown quiet, the crowd hanging on the edge of a collective inhale. Curiously, the only sound was the omnipresent piped-in music. Right now it was Bobby Darin singing Mac the Knife. Laughable irony. The soundtrack of my life. I didn't laugh. Ponder was totally out of it, like the wheels were still turning but the hamster had died. He scratched at his arm, then rolled over and pushed himself to his knees. Jerry grabbed an arm to steady him as he staggered to his feet. Mr. Ponder, if you're not hurt, you've got a lot of blood there. Maybe someone else needs our assistance? Can you help us out? Where were you before you showed up here? Since I'd been singularly unsuccessful, Jerry took up the cause. I don't know. His brow creased with effort. Game? Kids? Okay. Close to here? I asked. Lake. Near a lake? This being the Mojave, lakes were not plentiful. The first glimmer of hope. A big lake? If he meant Lake Mead, searching there could take a while, but it'd be a start. Asshole, he muttered, shrugging out of Jerry's grasp. Jerry moved back, but only a step or two. Ponder's non sequitur momentarily rocked me back on my heels. Then the bolt of lightning seared through my pea brain. Shit. Lake? You mean Senator Lake? This is his blood? I tried to keep my voice calm, but it didn't work. Even to me it sounded screechy and tight. Ponder looked at me, panting as if he'd sprinted to where he stood. For a moment, I thought I saw clarity and horror. Then his knees buckled, and he crumpled. Jerry and I both jumped. He caught his left arm, I the right, then we gently lowered him to the floor. Where the hell is the doctor? I growled, wishing somebody, anybody, would show up. Busy with a bleeder in stairwell 15, Jerry said. A guy took a header, split his skull. Doc will be here as soon as he can. I keyed security again and got the same kid, Fox. Any luck on figuring out where the knife guy came from? I didn't feel the need to explain the man was Ponder. Experience had taught me it was best to give only the information needed, and nothing more. We're not finding him on any of the feeds. Okay, check with the front desk. Find out if Senator Justice Lake is registered in the hotel. If so, we need to check his room. Better yet, we need to find him. Stat. Break the rules, do what you need to do. I'll shoulder the consequences. Just find him. I tried not to shout. I didn't want the closest bystanders to hear. But damn, Senator Lake. Granted, Lake was a worm, and a particular thorn in Ponder's foot. They were on opposing teams in the NFL in Vegas battle, but Ponder had won, and knifing Lake wasn't even close to an ideal solution to the bad blood between them. A good one, maybe, but not ideal. I'd met Lake once. He was the kind of guy who put the justifiable in justifiable homicide, but I couldn't see the point in testing that theory if one had already won. Where am I? Ponder whispered, his voice hoarse. The Babylon, I answered. Mr. Ponder, I let a hint of demand into my voice. We need to find Senator Lake. Where is he? Flashes popped as the crowd pressed in, eager to record every word. Lake? He spat the word. You find him, I'll kill him. Bethany moved in close. Leaning in, she whispered, I know where you can find him. Chapter 3. What? I whirled on her. How would you know? I didn't mean it quite the way it came out. Fear was doing the talking. How could my kid cousin be caught up in a murder or assault, or something bad with a whole lot of blood? See those welts? She pointed to red marks peppering the right side of Ponder's face and his neck and torso where his shirt gaped open. I know what caused them. In a blinding bolt of clarity, I did too. Ponder was at War Vegas tonight? Bethany nodded, her eyes dark in a pale face. I snagged my phone from its place on my hip and dialed. Romeo picked up before it even rang on my end. Almost there. Shit. You'd think there was a demonstrators convention in town from the number of folks out here with banners and placards. If you don't have a cause, a bullhorn, and a closed mind these days, you can't get any press. I need you to change routes. I gave him the lowdown on our theory, keeping my voice low and my hand cupped over my mouth. Last thing we needed was a bunch of interested spectators going along for the gruesome ride. You think somebody shot Senator Lake and his body is somewhere at War Vegas? Romeo didn't sound surprised. In fact, he sounded world-weary and stretched so thin he twanged. Tires squealed in the background. I could picture him wheeling his lumbering Metro-issued vehicle through a tight U-turn, the shocks sagging, the whole thing leaning against the centrifugal force. Nobody here can find Ponder on any of the video feeds, which means he likely wasn't in the hotel when he got all that blood all over him. Okay, I'm en route. I'll send a couple of officers to hang on to Ponder until I can get there. Somebody else could come arrest him or take him in for questioning, I felt sure. But I didn't want anyone handling Ponder and my hotel other than Romeo and his kid glove treatment, so I didn't suggest it. I'll stash Ponder in my office. The doc should give him a once-over. He's higher than a 3-year-old on a Tonka truck overload. That bad? A kite on a very long string. You never run out of those things, do you? What? Never mind. I'll call you if I find anything. Mr. Ponder slumped in a chair by the window in the front vestibule of my office. When I'd designed the windows overlooking the lobby below, privacy of a potential murder suspect hadn't been front and center. His back to the glass, we'd drawn the shades to keep zoom lenses and grainy news footage at bay. Breathing a bit easier now, he kept his head bowed. "Asshole?" a voice sang out from the corner. I laughed. I couldn't help myself. Leave it to my foul-mouthed macaw, Newton, to correctly sum up a situation in one word. "Can't you train that bird any better?" Jerry and his man had half-carried Ponder to the mezzanine. With a hand to my chest, I feigned insult. "Please, he nailed it." "You got the EMTs coming?" Jerry asked, even though he knew the answer. "Of course. Our job is to keep 'em alive until they get through the crazies out front." The NFL, once America's pastime, or was that baseball? Anyway, one of our defining sports had become polarizing. Factions squared off over a neutral zone patrolled by the police, everyone shouting obscenities across the divide. Kneel or don't kneel. Offense so easily taken where none was meant. Closed minds, open mouths, a sign of the times. I wanted my magic back, and maybe some civility and appreciation for differences and the learning possibilities inherent in them. Yeah, I'm a dreamer. But Vegas, the land of misfit humans, was good at that melting pot thing. Maybe we could lead the nation into a kinder and gentler world. The thought, so out there, struck me as a real possibility. New York City knew how to break down fences as well. "I'd say Narcan as a precaution." Jerry was one step ahead of me on the same trail. Ponder looked like just another opioid overdose. We'd seen so many lately I could recognize them at 100 yards. We had 2 kits stashed in the kitchenette. Somehow that seemed like a good place for an antidote to narcotic poisoning. I handed the kit to Jerry and he did the administering. Blood wasn't my thing, and Mr. Ponder had bathed in the stuff. Almost immediately, Mr. Ponder's breathing eased. If only something could bestow the same effect on me. But I couldn't stop thinking about who had donated all that blood. Where was he? Yes, I had everyone beating the bushes, and if the victim was in my hotel, we'd find him. But I needed to do something. Nothing worse than being at the starting line, engines revving, waiting. Pretty soon my head would explode, or I would. My assistant, Miss P., all polished perfection in her dolce, cascades of gold chains, and spiked golden hair with matching attitude, rushed through the door only a few minutes behind us. I skewered her with the spear of my frustration. Aren't you supposed to be keeping the former NFL greats and the current ones from misbehaving by offering them supervised VIP treatment? That sounded a lot like handling teenagers, probably for good reason, though young humans were not my forte, nor in my job description, thank God. Although Christophe, my fiancé Jean-Charles's 5-year-old son, and I seemed to be getting along. Probably a reason for that, too. Maturity wasn't my strong suit. Miss P raised an eyebrow, something she'd learned from me, which didn't necessarily mean it was an appropriate response. Brandy's handling it. Brandy, young, beautiful, and Detective Romeo's main squeeze, was the youngest member of our customer service inner circle. Miss P, ever the hostess no matter how unseemly the gathering, poured champagne for Jerry and herself, Wild Turkey 101 for me. Mr. Ponder got water. He didn't seem to care. Instead, he'd crinkle his brows and glance around, taking us all in, each time as if seeing us for the first time. Sweat ran in rivulets down the sides of his face. Periodically, he'd hike a sleeve and scratch at his skin. It was almost raw. One leg bounced, powered by nervous energy, yet he remained curiously removed from the blood. To have words with Jerry, I turned my back on the room and stepped closer. "Where were you?" Circles of sweat darkened his shirt under each arm. With his fingers, he touched at the sweat dripping down his face. Then he studied his fingers as if expecting blood, and then he wiped them on his khakis. "We'd gotten a call. Disturbance in the bungalows." The bungalows in the Casbah was our private enclave reserved for only the most worthy patrons, which, by casino definition, were the ones keeping the most money in play on a very regular basis. And? False alarm? Who made the call? He pursed his lips and shook his head. "Fox took it. Haven't had a chance to dig out the details." His hand shook as he pulled a handkerchief out of his pocket and mopped the sweat. "You okay?" I squeezed his arm and he flinched. "Sure." He didn't sound convinced. "Ran to the Casbah, then to the lobby when I heard your call. No time to catch my breath." "Still smoking?" "This job eats a hole in you." A hackneyed excuse. If you're looking for an easy way out, lung cancer isn't it. The door burst open, interrupting his glare. My father, his face pinched in pain and worry, his beard a dark shadow on unusually pale skin, strode through. While he lacked his normal bravado, he radiated enough pissed off to attract everyone's attention. "Great. Who invited drama to this party?" "Lucky. What the hell? Why do you want to find Senator Lake, that asshole?" His eyes bugged when he got a look at Mr. Ponder. "Nolan? Shit. Who shot you?" "Nobody," I managed, before being drowned in the shriek of Skye Ponder, the current Mrs., who rode in on my father's wake. Ponder flinched. Hell, we all did. One step too slow, I almost caught her, but before Jerry, who was slower still, and I could stop her, she flung herself across the room toward her husband. We needn't have worried that she'd deposit her trace on him as well. She stopped at the sight of him, leaving a foot between them. "Oh, Nolan!" Jerry took one arm and I took the other, making her a human wishbone. "Give me an excuse, Skye. We'll make a wish." Tiny and emaciated in the current style, Skye was no match for my bulk, even though she tugged and twisted and clawed at my grip on her arm. So much for my threats. "Skye, pull yourself together. This isn't helping." A bad tack, I know. Telling a crazed person to pull herself together usually backfired, and this time was no exception. But I was all out of clever. She turned on me, talons at the ready and going for my eyes. Cocking my elbow, I waited for a clear shot. One blow to her jaw, or maybe her nose. Putting a kink in its surgical perfection would be striking a blow for us unaltered heathens. Just as I coiled, lining up on a target, Jerry grabbed her from behind, pinning her arms to her sides. He picked her up, saving me from myself. Stellar character that I am, I graced him with a glare. What was it with me tonight? I was itching for a fight and couldn't figure out what was spurring me on. Of course, being railroaded into plans to meet my fiancé's mother might have something to do with it. Shouldn't I be the leading lady of my own life? Right now, it seemed everybody else got the plum parts, and I had only a minor speaking role. With her feet dangling, Sky Ponder flailed backward at Jerry, but only landed one glancing blow, losing a shoe, a lubu, of course. I kicked it aside. How did such a classless woman come by classy taste? Imitation, according to my mother, but that would mean the woman had a modicum of intellect, which was impossible to detect. I could have told her fixing up the outside never upgraded the inside. That took way more work. Not that she would understand or care. Jerry plopped Mrs. Ponder unceremoniously in a chair, catching her as the chair threatened to tip over backward. "Be still, or you'll be spending the rest of the night in the drunk tank in the basement." Beads of sweat glistened on his bald pate. Far from his normal pillar of strength, he looked a little wobbly, his gaze darting around the room. From her chair, Mrs. Ponder lashed out. Her remaining shoe connected with Jerry's shin in a bone-bruising thunk. He didn't even flinch. "Sky, I'll have you arrested." I barked the words like a rabid dog, thankfully without the frothing mouth. "Now sit and shut up." That seemed to do it. She squirmed in her chair like an overactive child, but she stayed put. Threats, a major arrow in my quiver of control, were having only limited success. "Arrested for what?" Cowed, she could still throw some attitude. "Being supremely irritating." Miss P hid her smirk at Sky's acceptance of my bullshit. I watched Jerry. Something about him looked off. His breathing was shallow, his face haggard as he leaned against the wall behind Mrs. Ponder. Maybe he was tired, as he'd said. He sure looked it. My father loomed over Nolan Ponder. "Are you hurt?" He looked around the room, then glared at me. "Why haven't you helped him?" "We've done all we can. EMTs are on their way. The doc, too, though he's handling high volume tonight." "He's not hurt?" Some of his bluster leaked away. I shook my head. "High as a kite, but the blood is somebody else's." He whirled on Ponder, who was still taking all of this rather casually, even as stoned as he was. "What the hell have you done?" "Don't answer that," I ordered Mr. Ponder. Apparently, I was the only one thinking down the road to incarcerations and courtrooms. But to be honest, I was half inclined to throttle the truth out of him. I had no idea how to balance his interests with the blood donors. Romeo hadn't called, so I assumed he hadn't found a victim. Not that he'd had much time. Amazingly, Ponder clamped his mouth shut, leaving me in my precarious ethical dilemma. "Father?" I could do pissed off, too. "You know better. He's whacked out of his mind. We've got enough problems right now without encouraging self-incrimination, our largest being the person who's missing all that blood." I think I might have yelled that last part. "Seems Ponder could shed some light on that." His growl matched my bite. "He can't remember Jack," I said, hoping a lack of information would shut down his bluster. "We're turning over every rock we can think of, hoping he slithers out. I got this one, Father." My father on the warpath would be more than I could handle tonight. Old school Vegas, he was used to handling problems in his own style, which often not only flouted the law, but beat it into submission. He backed down. "This whole NFL thing has the world on tilt." No shit. I took a deep breath. There was nothing else to do but hold the lid on until the EMTs and the cops got here. "Mr. Ponder?" I asked all casual-like. Without saying more, would you happen to know where Senator Lake might be? "Lake?" My father tensed. "What does that snake have to do with this?" His eyes widened. "You think the blood is—" I silenced him with a slitty-eyed look, then turned back to Ponder. "Senator Lake, have you seen him?" Ponder wove a little in his chair as he tried to hold eye contact. "Dark. Shot. Blood." He shivered. Sky pressed her perfect page boy into place, then tucked her hands under her thighs. Everything about her set my teeth on edge. The forced concern, the histrionics. And wasn't there a law about wearing Lily Pulitzer outside of Florida, or after midnight? Her dress was perfect for a yacht in the Med, but not so much for after-hours Vegas in January. And neon orange nail polish was trying way too hard. "He's not talking until our lawyer gets here." "Sky?" Ponder perked up like a puppy responding to his master's voice. "What the hell are you doing here?" From his tone, it was hard to tell whether he was happy or not. Confusion was what came through the loudest. I just got in. She gave me a measured glance, not even bothering to veil the challenge in it. I was looking for my husband. Then I saw the videos go up on YouTube. I grabbed Albert, and here we are. Her voice, high-pitched with a perpetual whine, reminded me of a 5-year-old. Even though you could crush them, they lied to you anyway, just to see what would happen. You weren't expected? She plucked at the hem of her skirt, drawing the attention of every male in the room to her legs, a strategy as old as time. Mrs. Ponder? My husband. I thought I'd surprise him. Damn party, Ponder growled. I told you not to come. I glanced back at him. His head hung forward, his chin on his chest. A party? Sky answered for him. It is a big celebration moving the team to Vegas. She shrugged a bony shoulder as her gaze skittered from mine. Nobody wants to be left out of the biggest party of the year. I wanted to disagree. I'd be more than happy to be left out. Where did you come in from? I asked. She ignored me for a moment, as if trying to figure out who was the alpha dog in the room. Her gaze swept the room, then reluctantly, like a puppy looking for love, sniffed in my direction. L.A. I have a suite at Chateau Marmont, she said, as if I surely should know that. What happened here? What have your goons done to my husband? Why is there all that blood? She gave a shiver of revulsion worthy of an Oscar, but a tiny tear trickling down her cheek would ice it. I kept looking for it, but it never came. Shut up and sit down, Sky. Nolan Ponder waded into the fray, his voice weak but filled with conviction. The drugs were losing their effect. First, Lucky, could you have someone escort my wife to our suite? Now that was an unexpected turn. So, the current missus had only need-to-know status. Interesting. Sky stomped her foot. She'd reinstalled the shoe after shaking some sand out of it. Nolan! He waved her away. She reached for his arm, but I grabbed her before she touched him. Enough of us had donated to the trace evidence on the man already. You call me, Nolan, if you need anything. With a quick move, she bypassed me and pressed a cell phone into his hand. He dropped it, and it clattered to the floor. I retrieved it, an iPhone, its case emblazoned with the new team logo in red and gold. He took it, stuffing it in an inside jacket pocket. Then his face closed and he nodded to Jerry. Get rid of her. Jerry opened the office door and motioned to his men who waited in the hall. One of them stepped inside. My father jumped into the silence while we waited for Mrs. Ponder to gather her things and her dignity. Do you think the victim could be in the hotel? I took my father's elbow and led him out of the middle of the action to the chair behind the desk. I have security and housekeeping scouring the property, surreptitiously, of course. And? My father settled in the chair, his face ashen underneath a flush of anger. Nary a drop of blood. Miss P moved in beside him, holding the chair with one hand and handing him a wild turkey with the other. Here you go, sir. Just what the doctor ordered. He accepted her peace offering with a glare. He'd been outmaneuvered. He didn't have to like it. He just had to live with it. Miss P sidestepped my displeasure. Bourbon was not what the doctor had ordered. My father's recovery from a bullet to the chest had been slower than anyone was comfortable with. And spirits, no matter how emotionally medicinal, were not on his permitted list. But I was in no mood to quibble. I'd lose anyway. This was one relationship in my life that eluded me. Okay, not true. In fact, they all did. At sea in an emotional dinghy, every seam leaking, I hadn't a clue what ocean I navigated, nor where I'd eventually drown. I turned back to Ponder. He'd been rooting in his pocket. Extending his hand, he opened his fist to show a casino chip. It looked like ours. I have this. Not sure where it came from. Nolan! Sky stopped on her way through the door. Her foot stomp carried a veiled warning. Get out of here, Sky. She didn't budge. I pulled my father's pocket square from his pocket, then flapped it open, and Mr. Ponder placed the chip in the center. Our chip for sure. Mr. Ponder moved to wipe his eyes, but stopped at the sight of the blood. One of the players, he said something about a more interesting game. I went with him. I must have found it. Player? Yeah, the kid, Boudreaux. Nolan! Skye screeched. I gave a nod to the security guy, and he pulled her toward the door. Once the door closed behind them, I turned to Jerry. Any private games tonight? Security monitored all non-casino games in the hotel. For obvious liability reasons, we didn't have many. If he heard me, it didn't register. Sweat poured off of him, and he'd started to shiver. His gaze wandered, a bee tasting the flowers, but not finding any to his liking. Jerry, are you okay? His hand shook as he swiped at the sweat on his brow as he finally looked at me. Tired, I guess. Any reports of someone running a game in the hotel tonight? I asked again, and I shucked and jived a bit, trying to catch Jerry's attention and keep it. No, but the loonies are running the asylum. He gave a silly, choked laugh. Fox can handle it. He's Senator Lake's man. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. Very out of character for Jerry, who wore decorum like a Boy Scout merit badge. Is he okay? Miss P got the same vibes I was getting. Fox works for Lake? Some politician's lackey is on our desk tonight? I could have told you that, Ponder chimed in, still not quite himself, but looking better by the minute. I was kept out of the loop. Why? Jerry shrugged, then gave my father a pointed look. Like I said, the loonies. My breath caught. Was my father messed up in this? I wouldn't brace him in front of these people. He deserved that much. But when I had him alone... Boudreaux. Doesn't he play for your team, Nolan? After that fiasco in the elevator, I told him this season just over would be his last. Fiasco in the elevator? My father gave me a quizzical look. Normally on top of stories like this, he'd fallen behind, not only in the news, but in his recovery as well. He dropped a girlfriend with an elbow to the jaw. Caught on tape, he copped to an alcohol abuse problem. Local boy, he's from Ely. His daddy's some sort of bigwig up there. Bo played at Reno before making the leap to the NFL. Probably more than anyone wanted to know. We need to find him. Conversation stopped as I got on my phone. This time, a call to the front desk. Sergio Fabiano, our front desk manager, answered with his trademark effusive tone. He was our resident babe magnet, or whatever they called two beautiful men these days, and he loved to infuse his voice with a sort of breathless quality, something I found totally off-putting, along with his too long black hair that he was constantly flipping out of his eyes. It's a great night at the Babylon, where the world comes for fun. Sergio Fabiano here to help. That wasn't our official tagline, but it also wasn't a battle I wanted to fight. Sergio, I need to know which room Beau Boudreaux is registered in. Yes, Miss O'Toole. His voice dropped the effusive. One momentito. I felt all eyes in the room on me while I waited for him to return. I didn't have to wait long. We don't have anyone by that name on the register. Of course, this couldn't be easy. He's famous in some circles. He might have registered under a different name. He's one of the NFL players here for the big announcement. Call his team, any players you can find, and see if you can find him, okay? Last I saw him, he was in the lobby. Yes, miss. Sergio will find him for you. I disconnected and pocketed my phone as I looked around my office. He's working on it. Mr. Ponder seemed to be better able to focus, so I kept with the questions, dancing around my previous advice to everyone else. What kind of game? Shivers racked his body. Man, what did they do to me? I leaned to the side, trying to see his eyes. Mr. Ponder, you okay? You need help? Frankly, to me, he looked the best he had all night. What kind of game did they lure you in with? By some incredible force of will, he pulled himself more upright. I assume baccarat? High stakes? That's what I play. Is that what they said? They said a different kind of game. I was playing baccarat, so I assumed they meant a different version of that game. That was their implication. Where? I don't remember. He turned tired eyes on me, but they looked clear. Did you go by car? I don't know. Jerry, do your folks have any new information? No response. Jerry tried to answer, then his head lolled onto his chest and his knees buckled. Bethany, who'd been holding up the wall in the corner, lunged for him. "Don't!" I barked. That single syllable hit like a jolt from a taser, and she stopped as if frozen. In slow motion, Jerry slid down the wall, landed on his knees, then fell forward. I cringed when his face hit the carpet. "He's going to kill you," Bethany said. "Not if he dies first." I dropped to my knees by his side. His breath was rapid and shallow, but he was breathing. Blood oozed from his nose that angled a bit off-center. Hard to tell with it still mashed into my carpet. Bethany eased down opposite me, Jerry between us. "Dies?" The smirk in her voice had vanished. "Don't touch him," I said in the same tone, but now with a sense of urgency. I rested my hands on my knees to keep from grabbing Jerry and doing anything I could to help him. But I couldn't. Not yet. "Miss P, get the other Narcan kit, and hurry." Then I turned back to Bethany. "I'm going to roll him over. Don't you touch him." I'd seen the white powder on his right side after he'd grabbed Mr. Ponder. Jerry had brushed it off with both hands. Reaching inside Jerry's shirt, I grabbed the fabric from the inside. Then, with my forearm for leverage and bracing him against my knee, I eased him over. "Jerry?" No response. With 2 fingers, I gently opened his eyes. All white. Miss P disappeared into the back office, then reappeared with the requested drug and a nasal squeeze bottle. "I thought I'd seen it all," I said, as I administered the antidote. But I'd never seen my security head ODing on opioids. "Call the paramedics. Find out where the fucking hell they are." "Bad girl. Very bad girl," Newton sang out. "And somebody shoot the fucking bird." "Asshole." Newton gave it his derisive inflection, normally reserved for me. His version of eating crow. Not that parrots were omnivorous. Jerry's heart is racing off the charts, along with itching, sweating, weakness, losing consciousness. He wasn't like this in the lobby. I sat back on my heels and prayed for my friend, my business better half, to stabilize. "What's going on? You're freaking me out," Bethany said, her eyes wide. "See the white powder on Ponder's jacket, left side and sleeve?" "Yeah." Jerry got that all over him, then brushed it off with his bare hands. "You think touching it did this? What the hell is it?" If he'd encountered the stuff in my hotel, that put not only all of us, but all of my guests at risk. Fentanyl, a new form of super potent opioid. Romeo told me he almost lost one of his men to it last week. The stuff can kill you even if your only exposure is dermal. You don't even have to ingest it. The state has petitioned to use it in the cocktail to execute the death row guys. I loved irony, but this tidbit stuck in my throat. "They've been cutting heroin with the stuff. Amazingly lethal," Miss P added. Man, what happened to the days when having a few drinks and dancing the night away was considered a good high? This first sign of getting old was pining for days gone by as somehow better. With that as a metric, my age was showing. "Your age is showing." My father gave me a hint of a smile, as if reading my mind. "And my wisdom." I sat back on my heels. This explains the opioid haze he was in. Not sure why it didn't kill him, though. "You didn't touch it?" Bethany's voice turned breathless, and she grabbed my arm. "It could have been you." "No, luck of the draw." "If you had, I wouldn't have known what to do." "Jerry would have, and Miss P, and now you know too." Metro issued every member a Narcan kit. Hell, they even carry one for the dogs. They sniff it out and it kills them. Lost 2 dogs before Romeo got the department's okay for the kits. We have them all around the hotel. Security carries them. Hell of a world. "Where do you think Ponder ran into this stuff? And if it's so potent, why didn't it kill him?" my father asked. If this stuff was in my hotel... "Miss P?" I communicated my horror with a look. "I'm on it." For some reason, that flipped my pissed-off switch. Hell, everybody's on it. We need to find it. Find Boudreaux. Find Lake. Find something. My voice rose with each word, riding on my anger and my fear. I looked down at Jerry, the man who had been my rock for decades and had saved my ass more times than I could count. "Don't you dare die on me." My phone rang. "What?" I didn't even look at the caller ID. "We've found something," Romeo said, his voice a monotone. I could use your help.